is against white's first queen's pawn move, pawn to d4. Now, what I love the most about this system is that it works fine across multiple different scenarios, but it works the best against the London system. It simply crushes it. But before we get to that juicy stuff, let me first tell you the overall idea of the Czech defense. So initially go pawn d6, after pawn to c4 and knight f6. It is a setup, therefore, particular moves don't really matter. You are going to play same moves all the time. But goes knight c3, you play pawn to c6, and after e4 they grab the center. You play this move queen a5, which is one of the standard and key moves in the Czech defense. It serves two purposes. First, it pins this knight down to the king. And actually, some of your opponents at this point will overlook this, will play some normal developing move, and will just overlook that you can grab this pawn because the knight is pinned. But this is like more of an additional trap that you set along the way, even though some of your opponents will fall for this trap. But even if they don't, your main idea is that on the next move, let's say they play bishop d2 and try to somehow neutralize the speed and counterattack you. Your main idea is that from here, the queen also supports your advancement in the center of your pawn to e5. In this particular case, you could play e5 right away, and it's absolutely fine, but I recommend that you move your queen back just because of this bishop on d2. It's a bit annoying that it stands opposite your queen, creates some kind of discovered attack threats, so you can drop it back to c7 to this safe square, and after that you proceed with your main plan, pawn to e5. The fact that white played this move bishop d2 while you pushed your queen back and forth doesn't really matter, because the bishop on d2 does nothing. It only blocks white's queen, and therefore it's not a useful move for white anyway. Now, they're going to play some move, let's say knight f3 and pawn to e5. Now, that's really the setup that you're aiming for. These three pawns are fulfilling a very important defensive function. They are serving as a barrier on the way of white's pieces, so they can't really approach you and attack you. And here, especially, notice that this pawn on c6 is covering these squares, and therefore they can never jump and attack you anyhow. And even though computer says that white is better because they have more space, but it's not helpful for white player who has no idea how to handle this position at all, because here we're talking about positional play maneuvering, things that beginner to intermediate players have very shaky understanding about, and therefore your opponents will usually play wrong moves all over the place. Even in this position, it's quite common for white to take here, which is already quite wrong. After this exchange, this helps you to activate your bishop along this diagonal, and it weakens white's center. Previously, they had this nice pawn wall in the center, and they don't have it anymore. Also, let's say they go here, bishop e2. Here you could just develop any way you want. You could just play bishop e7 and castle, and then your position is absolutely fine. But what I recommend is you go bishop g4. Because in this position, after I traded in center, they've got these weak squares in the middle of the board, and especially the d4 square is really juicy. If you can land your knight, or even the bishop there in the future, you can land your bishop, or you can land your knight in the future there after knight d7 and then maneuver it all the way to d4, that would be really good, and this outpost square would allow you to dominate. With that being said, bishop g4 allows you to eliminate the main defender of the d4 square, this time from f3. And it's actually quite funny that your opponent usually has no clue, and at some point they play pawn h3, pushing this bishop away, but in this case you're actually quite happy to trade it off, because that was part of your plan. Now let's see, go bishop e7. And here the most played move by white is bishop g5. Again, a move in the wrong direction. Doesn't do anything here. Your knight is overprotected already, so you can play h6 and kick it away, bishop h4, and then you castle, and slowly but surely you outplay white, because they are just clueless. They don't know the plan, they don't know what to do, and your plan is simple. After, let's say, they go queen to c2, you want to land your knight on that juicy square d4. In this position, the most played move is b4, which is yet another error. It only helps your knight to go where it wanted to go, plus it weakens this pawn on b4. Now knight to d4 is really a big threat that would attack the queen, attack the bishop. You can bring a rook to d8, you're still hitting this pawn on b4, and life's excellent. Alright, this time let's try to play better for your opponent. Still, he has to parry this threat. Let's say he goes bishop d2. So far, it's all the same stuff. We go queen c7 on the next move. We play pawn to e5. And let's say this time your opponent does not take an e5, which is wrong, and goes pawn d5, which is better. What do you do then? Well, just develop. Nothing special at all. That's the beauty of this whole thing. Just play very simple moves all the time. So you just play bishop e7, and then you castle, them in just very simple development. Now you want to develop your queenside pieces. You could move the knight, but this would block the bishop, and therefore it's better to bring the bishop out first, and then on the next move you can develop the bishop. So let's say they play h3, can bring our bishop back to h5. In this case, by the way, there is no need to trade on f3. If you remember in the previous variation, I suggested you to exchange there, because after that we were going to bring our knight all the way forward to e6 square. We were going to maneuver our knight over there. Right now, since these pawns are still on the board, we can't do that, and therefore you don't need to trade here. You can just go back, playing a standard move. And after that you play knight d7, finish your development, and you have a rock-solid position. Again, lots of your opponents are active players. They love tactics, attacking. Here it's much harder for white to figure out what to do. One of the common moves for white is a strange-looking knight h2, just trying to get rid of this bishop. You could trade, but bishop g6 is even more active. You attack this pawn at e4, and let's say after bishop d3 you now go knight d7, and now it not only develops your knight but also threatens knight c5, because from there, if you play it, that would hit the bishop, hit this pawn on e4. So white already has to be somewhat careful, because if they plunder it, they could be down a pawn. In this key position of the Czech defense, so far we have analyzed bishop d2. The other common move which you will see equally often is bishop to d3. It's also a good move because it defends this pawn on e4, and therefore you cannot capture it anymore. That said, your plan remains to be the same. In this case, you can play e5 right away. You don't have to bring our queen back to c7 because there is no danger, there is no bishop on d2 that could possibly X-ray the queen. Therefore, you may keep the queen there for as long as it's safe. Video, we have just played e5, our standard move, which creates this pawn barrier, and after that you can not worry and be happy for the rest of the game because you're really well defending. Now, we know that taking on e5 actually only helps you. It opens up this bishop, and generally speaking, creates all these weaknesses for white. In the future, we'll put the rook on the d file and we'll start putting pressure. Therefore, that's actually bad for white, even though they'll often go there anyway. If they play pawn to d5, in this case, I suggest a knight maneuver. So we got this juicy square of c5, and you can go knight to d7, aiming for the c5 square. Here, they usually go knight e2, and you play knight c5, aiming to exchange white's bishop. Generally speaking, a bishop is a little bit stronger than a knight, and therefore this exchange favors you. If your opponent decides to avoid this trade and play bishop c2, then voila, you still execute the same tactical threat. You can play knight takes c5, still taking advantage of this pin. Well, I was nearly ready to castle, but he was not on time. So knight takes e4 still wins a pawn. This trade doesn't change anything. The knight is pinned, can't move, therefore you're a pawn up. Let me also share with you one funny line that just demonstrates how strong your position is. Let's say your opponent noticed the threat and he doesn't play bishop c2, he just castles. Then you definitely want to snatch the bishop. Knight takes, queen takes, and after that, guess what you do? Well, just develop standard moves, nothing fancy. After we put these pawns, which serves as a barrier, then you're free to develop your pieces and castles. So we go bishop e7. Let's say your opponent wants to play in the most aggressive style possible, and he goes f4, saying, you know what? I'm gonna attack on the king side. You do nothing special, right? You just castle. You don't care. They take on e5, you recapture. What can they do now? And d6 is not a problem, because although it looks strong, it can go queen c5 with a double attack to the queen, to the king, and the pawn. Therefore, you're gonna pick up a pawn on the next move, so that fails. What else can they play? The most played moves here are bishop g5. Looks very strong at first, but in this case, you have another interesting tactical shot. And by the way, let this be a puzzle of the day. So if you can find a move for black which gives you an advantage, it's not a checkmate, but it gives you an advantage, please write it down in the comments below. And I'm saving the best for last. What I love the most about the Czech defense is that it works the best against the London system. One of the most annoying chess openings, because people haven't played it for so long that it just became a little bit too much. If they go for the London system against the Czech defense. So we play our stuff. So far so good. Knight f3, pawn c6, they play pawn e3, and in this case, you can go knight to d7, because you want to prepare this advancement pawn e5, and now white controls it just will be way too much, so you have to have this knight on d7. In previous operations you could play it without the knight, but now you have to have some extra support for this square. And then they usually play bishop d3, might play in their stuff, and now they still control 3 times, but you control it too, so we need one more, so we play our standard move queen a5 check. They're happily playing c3, they're a London move, and now you play pawn to e5. And In this case, the beauty of this scene is that now we're gaining tempo attacking this bishop. And after an exchange, we attack the bishop. It has to go either to g3 or a g5, doesn't matter. On the next move you play e4, and all of a sudden, you're away in a piece. What's the trick here? Well, you're double attacking these pieces. On top of that, your queen actually is putting some pressure to this bishop. So if the knight goes away, you could even pick up this bishop on g5. And that's how you win the game. Counting back a few moves, after a move queen a5 check to the king, if they cover not with a pawn but with a knight, another common London system move, that actually doesn't change anything. You still play the same move pawn e5, attacking the bishop, and after they stray, the bishop has to go, and after it goes anywhere it doesn't matter, you go pawn e4 and you still win a piece in the exact same fashion. This time they've got a knight on d2, but it's useless because it is pinned down to the king, and therefore it can't move, and thanks to this pawn on e4, you attack and capture one of these pieces. If he takes here, you recapture, the knight is still pinned, and you are winning the game. Of course, theoretically, I could have played differently and avoid this opening disaster. But the beauty is that the London system players usually don't really try to be super creative in an opening. They just play the moves that they know over and over again, aiming for the same system. And if they play mechanically against the Czech defense, here's how you defeat them.